Now that we've unzipped the files, it's time for the first stage in processing our photos. This is creating our calibration frames, or more specifically, our master calibration frames. Now if you click on the calibration frame folder and then click on one of the bias, darks, or flats, you will see many individual frames within that folder. Now we are going to combine them to create one master frame per each calibration frame. So we're going to have one master bias, one master flat, one master dark. To do this, we're going to have to use AstroImageJ. So let's start with bias. First, you're going to open in a single image in AstroImageJ by clicking File, Open. For consistency's sake, I'm going to be navigating to my bias folder and opening up the first frame I see there. Now they've opened up, I can go to Process and then Data Reduction Facility. When you do this, two windows will pop up. The first window, DP Coordinate Converter, you can just close. This is not needed. The second window, which will probably not have as many files already selected for you, is the one we're going to be using. The first step is to make sure all the checkboxes are deselected before we start. Now we are ready to create our first master calibration frame, which will be our bias. Go to Bias Subtraction and check Build. Then click the little file icon on the first line. The File Explorer will open up and you need to now navigate to where you have stored your bias files. So, click on the file folder where your bias is stored. You will notice that it will be empty. This is fine. We're just telling the location where to find the files, not to select the files. So click Select. Next thing you want to do in the box beside it is to put star.fit. You'll see the 0 there suddenly change to a number. This number should equal the number of files you have in your bias folder. For this case, we have 16 bias files, therefore the number 16 comes up. The next step is select where we want to save our master bias. To keep things organized, I'm going to create a brand new folder in my calibration frames folder named Masters. This is where I'm going to store all my master calibration files. Once I've done that, I can now use the line beside it to name what my master bias file will be called within that folder. I'm going to keep mbias.fits. Now I'm double checking if I have build selected and med selected in the bias elimination, and I can hit start and watch the master bias be created. Now I've sped this up here, it'll take a little bit longer on your computer. Now that we have a master bias, we can go see what it looks like. So navigate to your calibration frames, the folder where you saved it, and open it. Now I've chosen to assign anything that's a FITS file to be opened with AstroImageJ, which you can just use by clicking on the file and then picking the program you always want to open it in. And now we have our master bias file, and we are ready to move on to the next step. Now the next step, if you're following along in your student package, is to subtract the bias from our flats. To do this, we're going to uncheck Build beside the bias elimination and check Enable up at the file pattern naming. Now that that's highlighted, we can select the file and we can find where we have stored our flats files. Now these files, there are taken in 4 different filters depending on what we've used, and they're all stored in the same place. So I'm going to select that, and then I am going to make sure I put star.fits and I have the exact same number of files there as in my folder. And then I'm going to go down to bias subtraction and click enable, because we're going to enable subtracting our master bias from those flats files. Now, since I just selected the file, saved it, it already knows where it's located, it's matching up with the single file in that folder, everything's good. Now at the bottom here, it's going to put these calibrated flats files into a subfolder within the flats folder. I'm going to change that to say sub bias, so I know this is where we have stored all of the flats files that have had the bias subtracted. And I'm also going to have the extension change to sub bias. Now that that's all ready, I can hit start and watch it go. So now we're finished. We can see all our frames. We can close it. I'll show you where you can see these images. So go back to your calibration frames, find the RGB flats, and you notice now we have the sub bias folder within this folder with all our flats, and then each of the image files have minus bias on the end of them. So next thing we're going to do is repeat this for our luminance flats if they weren't already included in this RGB or narrowband flats folder. Same process again, except we're going to select the file that our luminance flats are sitting in. That's done. The next thing we want to do is again uncheck everything. We want a single flat frame for every single filter we have used. So in this case, this image is using a red, green, blue, as well as a luminance filter. You might have a luminance, HA, hydrogen alpha, sulfur, and oxygen 3 filter. It just depends on what we have taken the object with. So to do this, you're going to have to separate all of your different colored flat frames or different filters of your flats frames into its own separate folder. This is the easiest way to do it. So go to your RGB flats, and specifically go to the ones that you have subtracted the bias from. I sometimes find it easier to see it in list form. So you can see that the name always has the filter name in it as well. So you want to hit a new folder, and I'm going to call this blue. And I will put in all of the blue files, select them all, and move them into that folder. Repeat for the green, red, and blue. So next now we are going to build a single flat frame for each filter. Same thing that we did with the bias, we're going to hit build under flat division. We're going to select the folder. Let's start with our red. We're going to find it where we have saved it. This is why it's important to save your images in a location you know where it is. Calibration frames, RGB flats. So I'm going to start with the red, and this folder only contains red. So I know there should be 5 files in there, and then I'm going to choose where I want to save it. Now we've already created a folder that we want to save all our masters in. So this will be easy to find. Go to calibration frames and that folder and select. And then I'm going to change this name here to M flat red underscore red so I can see it. And now just make sure it says mid. Everything's checked. It should be good, and you can hit start. It's done. You can check out how your image looks, masters. There we go. Now let's repeat for each of the different filters of flat frame. So now, if you go into your file where you've saved all your masters, you should have a master bias, master flat blue, master flat green, master flat lum, or master flat red. Again, the red, green, blue might instead be HA, SI, or OIII. So hydrogen alpha, oxygen, or sulfur. Now, the next thing to do, we don't care about our bias anymore because it's already incorporated in the flat, but we have not done anything with our darks. We need to build a dark. Same process as before. Click on the little blue folder, go to where you have saved your files, select the dark folder. We have 16 darks. I'm going to again make sure that this is saved in the correct file where everything else is, like that. And I'm keeping the name mdark.fits. Next thing to do. Now, if we open up that folder with all our masters, we'll see we have an M bias, M dark, M flat for each of our filters. Now we've already applied the M bias, so we do not need to use this anymore, but we're going to be using the master darks and master flats to apply to our actual light photos, of the photos that we actually took of the target, and that will be done in the next step.